Story 1. I was a security guard for a government office. The office was connected to a mall, and part of my duties at closing was to help the mall security secure all the exits. I often had to ask people to leave the public bathrooms. Some were drug users, some were just trying to find a warm place to sleep in the winter. One evening at closing, I walked into the public bathroom to make sure it was empty. On the floor were two older men, probably in their 60s. They were engaged in an intimate act. I was pretty sure both were unhoused. It was about as unappealing as anything could be. When I told them to leave, one of them shouted, "Almost done." There was absolutely nothing in my training to cover this situation. Story 2. We saw a teenager burn to death when he was trapped in his car. We could not reach him because he was up against a retaining wall and the gas tank had ruptured on impact. The gas had flowed out from underneath the car. We could not access the driver's door because it would have meant standing in a pool of flaming gas. Story 3. A horse breaking down during a race, writhing with an obviously broken leg, then watching an equine veterinarian come out to euthanize it right there on the track. Story 4. A hostel with communal shower shoes next to signs reminding people not to urinate or defecate in the showers. The amount of hand sanitizer I used on that trip was insane. Story 5. My wife and I were in a Wendy's. It was a little later in the evening, and the only patrons were us and a grandmother with her grandson, who was about 8 years old. The woman was not paying any attention to the child. He sat at his own table, one of the two-seaters with a smaller surface. While we were there, he covered the top of the table with ketchup. He then grabbed the salt shaker and added a layer on top of the ketchup. The rest of his time was spent licking the table clean. No napkin, no fingers, just tongue to table. Story 6. A woman overdosed, and the room immediately cleared. No one stayed to help except me, my sister, and my father. If we had not performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation to the best of our ability, she would have died. Story 7. One time in Atlantic City, I saw two people having sex in an alley. The woman made him stop so she could squat and defecate on the floor. After she was done, without cleaning herself, he continued having sex with her. I did not stay until the end. Sorry if that ruins the story. Story 8. I saw a male birth attendant pick his teeth with a blood-covered glove during a birth in a developing country. Story 9. I was at a barbecue at my friend's house in high school. His parents were on a trip, and he was home with just their dog. The party was typical teenage stuff when adults are not around. There was a small grill with some sausages on it, but the main focus was a lot of alcohol. One of our friends drank on an almost empty stomach and got intoxicated quickly. The host gave him a grilled sausage and bread to soak up the alcohol. He ate half of it, leaned to the left, and casually vomited. Next, we saw the host's dog running to the vomit and eating it as fast as he could. The guy who had just vomited saw this and vomited again, on top of the dog's head. Story 10. I worked on a hog farm in my teens, mainly loading hogs onto trucks and doing maintenance. The hog pens were set up in a 40 by 40 foot square with two 18-foot gates at the front. Between the two gates was a T-section of steel fencing with a 4-foot head between the gates and a 6-foot piece extending into the pen. Loading hogs involved sorting them by size. Someone would go through the pens a few hours before and spray paint a stripe on the pigs big enough to be loaded onto trucks. When it was time to sort, 3 to 5 workers went into the pen with plastic or metal panels and pushed the marked pigs toward the open gate while preventing unmarked ones from escaping. One morning while sorting, we were pushing a large hog toward the gate, but it kept breaking through our line of panels. After the 4th or 5th time, we finally cornered it in the gate opening between the open gate and the 6-foot section of the T-fence. Suddenly, the pig tried to jump and landed on the sharp point of the fence. The pig was impaled on the fence, but it was stuck in the skin only. It flailed around, screaming in a way I had never heard before. The sound is etched in my mind. One coworker pushed the pig off the fence, which ripped the skin open and caused its intestines and stomach to fall out onto the floor. The pig was still alive, running around and screaming while dragging its organs through the pen. Other pigs started chasing and biting at its exposed organs. I was horrified. One coworker ran to the office, grabbed a gun, and put the pig down as quickly as possible. I became physically ill after seeing this and had to take a break. I quit the job a few months later. Summary: I witnessed a pig impale itself and have its guts fall out while still alive. Story 11. One day, during my sophomore year of high school, I forgot my phone in the music room. I realized it when I was almost home, so school had been out for a while by the time I got back. I cracked the door of the music room and saw one of the most popular girls in school with one of the most academically focused boys. He routinely did her homework for her, but we all thought it was because he was hopelessly in love with her. We did not think he was actually getting anything in return. Her boyfriend was a large football player who regularly mocked and tormented this boy. Although I was thoroughly revolted and vowed never to be involved in something like that again, a small part of me thought, good for him. Story 12. I saw a police canine, a large German shepherd, defecate on my cellmate's face in prison. He had gotten into a fight earlier that day, and that was his punishment. The sight of the dog squatting over someone made me almost vomit. Yes, this was in the United States. If you think this kind of thing does not happen in prison, you are quite naive. There are news stories of prisoners being scalded to death in showers, and the correctional officers still do not get punished. Imagine all the things they can do that do not get reported. Story 13. I was in the post office in the summer. It was hot and there was a long line. As I stood there, it smelled terrible. Not just bad, but actual feces. As I looked around, I saw a man in a wheelchair off to the side, not in line. He stood up, shook a large piece of feces out of his pant leg, then sat back down and rolled away. Story 14. Maggot-infested foot from mid-calf down, pouring out of his sneaker. His toenail popped up like the hood of a car, and maggots were packed into the goo. Skin cancer had taken over a man's neck and back. It was a rotting rainbow and resembled a zombie bite or infection that no movie prop or makeup could ever mimic. A pressure wound had liquefied someone's entire buttocks, leaving a papery thin skin to hold back a torrent of infected, rotting material that we had to clean out. Sticking a scalpel in to open it was like crepe paper bowl full of jelly, and when it was all out, it felt like an optical illusion, seeing too far into something that shouldn't be that deep. Severe diarrhea. Story 15. My first time at a casino, I was very excited about the glamour, but it was in Oklahoma, so it was actually disappointing. We went inside and immediately smelled the worst odor ever. I dabbled in forensic anthropology and had encountered many smells before, but not like this. An angry elderly woman on a walker came around the corner, and the smell made my nose tickle and my stomach turn. After she walked past, I turned around and saw that her right foot was dragging behind her leg. She was walking on bone, and her rotted, purple, bloated foot was only held on by a tendon. I never went back and had no desire to return. Story 16. I lived in a suburb of Lusaka, Zambia for a while. It is really not a bad place, and there are many friendly people there. However, they do not have the maintenance crews that I am used to in cities in the United States. A dog died on the side of the road on the route I walked every day. Each day, I watched it bloat to about 4 times its regular size and eventually burst open. There were swarms of flies and maggots, and you could smell it for miles until it decomposed. Story 17. In St. Louis, Missouri, around midnight, while having a drink with a friend on the patio outside a bar, I saw 2 fraternity-type men knock a homeless man out of his wheelchair. They just dumped him in the street. The homeless man appeared to be in his 60s, missing his left arm and leg. My friend and I were absolutely shocked. There is a somewhat positive part. Just as we were getting up to help the man back into his chair, a bouncer working at a nearby club stopped the 2 men. The bouncer had been talking with a few of his friends, who all surrounded the 2 men. The bouncer simply said, "Pick him up." The 2 men started to refuse, and one of the bouncer's friends said, "Listen, they are about to attack you like lions. It is going to be ugly." The fraternity men, scared, put him back in the chair. I would have liked to see them face consequences, but I will never forget the calmness and courage of the bouncer and his friends. Story 18. I was at a friend's house party one night, and they were serving barbecue hamburgers. His dog snuck up and snagged a few slices of cheese off the table edge, the type that are individually wrapped in plastic, and quickly gobbled them up. The next day, a bunch of us were still at the house, hungover. We were sitting in the yard when he let the dog out to go to the bathroom. The dog did his business, but as he trotted around afterward, someone noticed that a plastic cheese wrapper was hanging out of his rear. Laughter followed until the dog noticed too. Then he twisted his neck backward, grabbed the wrapper out, and ate it again. We all stared in disbelief. Revolting and amazing. Story 19. I was on a long bus ride from one city to another, a 6-hour journey. About 2 hours in, a sketchy-looking man boarded the bus at a stop in the middle of nowhere. He sat directly across the aisle from me. He was twitchy, muttering to himself, and smelled like a mix of body odor and something metallic. After about 30 minutes, I noticed he was fiddling with something under his hoodie. He kept glancing around nervously. Then I realized he had a dead pigeon in his lap. Feathers ruffled, stiff, obviously not alive. I stared in horror as he pulled out a rusty penknife and started cutting it open on the bus while whispering something about messages in the guts. People were frozen, pretending not to see it or assuming it was some weird drug thing. I was completely paralyzed. He sliced it open, scooped out part of its insides, sniffed it, and smeared some on a napkin as if reading it. At this point, the stench was unbearable, like rotting meat mixed with old blood and sweat. A woman in the back threw up. The bus driver pulled over and threatened to call the police. The man bolted out the door with the dead bird in hand and disappeared into the woods as if it was part of some ritual. We all sat there in stunned silence for a few minutes. Nobody spoke for the rest of the ride. Story 20. I was at a barbecue in a park, and there was a soccer game going on nearby. Suddenly, a fight broke out between the teams. I saw someone from the crowd running toward a player with a gun. 2 shots were fired, and the player was shot in the head. The man ran, got into a car, and left the park. I do not know if he was ever caught. Story 21. I used to work in the Lower East Side in Manhattan and frequently worked late. It is a party area, and every night I would see a homeless man with no arms and no legs in a wheelchair who seemed pretty drugged up, with a tip jar full of money. I always wondered how he got there or what his story was, but never talked to him because he was not really coherent. One night, I saw him passed out and covered in his own vomit, and I had a really bad feeling. A couple of nights later, I was working until about midnight, and while I was crossing that block, I witnessed a van pull up. 6 men got out, took the jar, and put the man back in the van. They were pumping him full of drugs and using him as a source of money every day on the street. I think that is human trafficking. It is still the darkest thing I have ever seen. Story 22. My dear friend died of a fentanyl overdose. He went radio silent for about 4 days, which was highly unusual. I called the city morgue, and they confirmed he had died. After collecting myself, I called his mother, who screamed and sobbed hysterically. I will never forget the pain in her scream. As a courtesy to his family, who lived on the other side of the country, I agreed to clean out his apartment and ship his belongings back to his mother and sister. There was blood and bodily fluid pooled on the ground where his body was. I had to keep stepping over it to grab stuff, pills and needles everywhere. I scrubbed blood spatter off a PlayStation 5 so I could send it back to his family, who did not come for much. I dissociated in that moment and did not recover mentally until several months of intensive therapy. His family still does not know what I saw in that room. The energy in that room was so dark. I feel a piece of my soul will forever remain there. I miss you, Jake. Story 23. Watched a woman squat between 2 cars to do a number 2. She was walking her dog, and her dog was just waiting for her. The irony was striking. No, she did not appear homeless. Quite the opposite, in fact. This happened in France. Story 24. So, I've seen some genuinely gross stuff, but nothing bothers me as much as spit and mucus. It's one of the reasons I knew I could never be a nurse. I have a toddler, and I've done pretty well with the general baby and toddler messiness, but she did cause me to throw up once. I like to use silicone bibs with the food catcher when my baby eats because they do much more than cloth bibs. She still gets her lap covered in food somehow, but it's less than with a cloth bib. A few weeks ago, she was teething badly. She had 3 teeth coming in. 2 appeared on the same day, and the third came in 2 days later, so she was drooling heavily. She also often gags herself with her fingers when teething. After a meal, I went through the usual routine. Took off the bib, rinsed it out, put it in the dirty baby dish container, got her out of the high chair, wiped it down, and so on. When I took her bib off, I looked at it. It was full of food bits, partially chewed food bits, and, no exaggeration, about a cup of spit and drool. I rushed to the kitchen trash can, fighting the urge to gag, and threw up everything I had eaten during that meal. I had to sit down for a minute before I could actually get her out of her high chair, because I struggle with intrusive thoughts. My brain sometimes randomly shows me that terrible image. Another story related to the theme comes from when I worked at a gas station convenience store. One day, there was a terrible smell all day coming from the bathroom. The toilets looked fine, but it smelled like human feces. The smell filled the entire store. When I went to empty the bathroom trash cans while cleaning, I discovered why. In the men's bathroom, where all kinds of unpleasant things often happen, someone had moved the bathroom trash can out of its spot, squatted, defecated on the floor, then moved the trash can back into place, perfectly covering the mess. I eat a lot of onions, sometimes multiple onions a day, and despite having some digestive issues, I have never seen such undigested onions come out of a person. You could clearly tell that he had eaten onions. I used a lot of bleach that day. What really bothers me is that it wasn't an accident. Planning went into that hateful act. And for what? Despite 2 minimum wage workers who hadn't done anything wrong, that behavior is unacceptable. Story 25. I have probably purged the most revolting things from my memory, but one that comes to mind is the night of my friend's bachelor party. We are a bunch of tame guys, especially him. We don't do crazy things, so I figured it would be fine. We went on a road trip, stopped along the way to do some outdoor activities, then went to a restaurant and eventually hit the bars. My friend is a lightweight drinker, and at least one of the guys on the trip was sober. What my friend didn't tell me is that one guy I'd never met before is an alcoholic who pressures people heavily. I had to work the next day, an unfortunate circumstance of my job at the time, so I left the others around 1 a.m. to get some rest and told the sober guy to keep an eye on the lightweight groom-to-be. At 3:30 a.m., I was awakened by shouts and confusion. The groom-to-be was extremely intoxicated, and the alcoholic guy had run off trying to buy drugs in a city he had never been to before. I told the sober guy to leave and go track down the alcoholic because he failed to keep the groom from getting dangerously drunk. Meanwhile, I tried to keep the groom on his side. He was rambling nonsensically, got a phone call thinking it was his future wife, and had a total panic attack. It turned out it was just the alcoholic, and then the groom said, oh. So I picked him up and took him to the hotel room bathroom. I then heard muffled screams and splashing that seemed to go on forever before it stopped. I opened the door and saw my friend lying on the bathroom floor wearing only briefs, surrounded by vomit. There was vomit on the floor, the walls, the mirror, the door, all over him, and even on the ceiling. In my panic, I didn't know what to do besides clean it up myself. I wasn't about to make some poor immigrant lady clean it, so I cleaned him up as best I could, dragged him out into the hotel room, and began cleaning with whatever towels and toilet paper we had. It was horrendous. Took me an hour, and I had to get up 3 hours later to go to work. Story 26. Walking home from work, a homeless man about 15 yards ahead of me dropped his pants and defecated all over the sidewalk. It was like a chocolate milk dispenser. Story 27. I watched a former classmate peel the dead skin off his sunburn and eat it in front of me. We were seniors in high school. Story 28. Growing up, I witnessed my mother's boyfriend kill one of our pet chickens and then proceed to saw it down the middle, like a hamburger bun. My mother was not home, but I remember her screaming when she saw the aftermath. Story 29. When I was young, I remember seeing a woman being insulted and slapped, probably by her partner, at the exit of a subway station in Paris, and no one cared. Story 30. My ex bought a guinea pig while also owning 2 large dogs. She was not mentally well at the time and was making extremely impulsive decisions, which is a common trait in people with borderline personality disorder. I told her that I was against her getting the guinea pig and that I would not be taking care of it. I did not have to worry about it for long because less than a week after she got it, I received a call from her, upset because the dogs tore the guinea pig apart. So, who had to pick up guts from the floor and mop up guinea pig blood? This guy. Story 31. I was traveling down the Amazon River in one of those cargo boats. After a few days, we finally pulled into a small community to stock up on essentials. The very first step I took onto the dock, I saw a dog squatting and shaking in a distressing position with liquid excrement coming out in every direction. I immediately lost my appetite. Story 32. I walked around a corner one night coming home from a club and stepped through a puddle without thinking much of it. I looked over and saw a woman who was a prostitute. She was standing on the corner with her backside aimed toward the street, spray splashing water. I had just walked through spray that was dirty. I went home, threw out my brand new Doc Martens and took a shower. Story 33. Went to Cardiff to watch Liverpool play Cardiff City. After the match, we had a few beers in a bar. A local woman walking past noticed Liverpool fans in the pub and started shouting and banging on the glass, yelling vague insults and threats. Suddenly, with speed and precision, she put her hand down her joggers, pulled out a bloody tampon, and threw it at the window. The tampon stayed for a moment, slowly slid down a bit, leaving a small trail, then fell onto the floor. She walked away. People were in shock. Some were vomiting, while the rest burst into laughter. It was a wild day. Story 34. Having dysentery and diarrhea at a refinery in India, I had to use the control room bathroom. The bathroom floor was covered in an inch of dirty water. I carefully stepped through it to reach the squatting toilet. I tried to lower my Nomex coveralls around my knees without dropping them into the water, but I did not succeed. Story 35. I just received an email from Social Security praising the Better Business Bureau passing. It is very insincere, and it makes me feel unwell. Story 36. I work retail security on the side. I watched an employee at the store go into a secluded area. She then proceeded to scratch herself vigorously, then switched to the rear and dug at that area. After a bit, she pulled out her hand and sniffed it. Then, she licked it. My coworker and I were laughing and retching at the same time. Story 37. Years ago, I worked at a small cafe. One night during closing, a man rushed in looking panicked. He asked to use the bathroom and we didn't think much of it. After 20 minutes, he finally came out looking fine. He thanked us and left. We checked the bathroom and found that the man had made a huge mess. It looked like a crime scene, like a biohazard level 10. We closed early that night and mopped in silence. I still think about it sometimes when I hear the word splatter. Story 38. The treatment of homeless people in almost every part of Canada and the United States is deeply troubling. The brutal abuse of the most vulnerable individuals is often ignored or even encouraged by those in positions of privilege. Story 39. Learning that people have a fascination with being farted on. I hate that I learned this and wish I never did. Story 40. A llama spitting in self-defense or annoyance. If you have not seen it, it is much grosser than it sounds. Story 41. In 1978, a man on a motorcycle was hit by a car. He was turning left legally, but the car did not see him and was speeding. The driver claimed innocence, blaming the motorcyclist, which was wrong. It was clear she was not paying attention. I and others witnessed this and informed the police. The driver broke the man's arms and legs in unnatural ways. He was unconscious. She hit him so hard he flew onto the sidewalk at my feet. The scene was disturbing and caused me nightmares for years. The impact still haunts me 47 years later. I do not know if the man survived. It was a tragic event. Story 42. My landlord frequently ate food that was past its expiration date. He could never throw old food away, even if it was green meat and rotten. One time while visiting, he made food. We declined to eat it. He sat down next to us on the sofa and ate his food. Shortly after finishing it, he vomited back into his bowl and laughed, saying it must have been the old cream he had. If that wasn't bad enough, He then tried to give it to our dog to eat. His reasoning was that he didn't want to waste food. Story 43. I had been for a business lunch in the mid-1980s. It was a nice restaurant with a translucent fixed awning in front of it, on the ground floor of a tall apartment building. I had just left and was a few feet past the awning when there was a crash, quickly followed by a crunching thud. I turned around to see a young man on his back, convulsing with blood under his head. I screamed for someone to call emergency services, as cell phones were not common then, and knelt beside him. I pulled off my silk blazer and slid it under his head. I held his hand and kept talking to him. He convulsed again and then stopped moving. The ambulance and police arrived a few minutes later. He had jumped from the 20th floor. He hit the restaurant awning first, then the sidewalk behind me. He had come as one of the Vietnamese boat people some years before. The medics offered me my blazer back. I thanked them and refused. Story 44. Probably the video of the Russian soldier getting his torso blown apart by a drone, then scrolling to see some meme right after. Man, are we in trouble. Story 45. Back in the late 1990s, I was a security guard at a casino in Atlantic City. One night, around midnight to 1 a.m., I watched an Asian woman playing two slot machines next to each other. I was approaching her from behind, about 50 to 75 feet away, and saw her stand up from her chair, move backwards slightly, squat down, then defecate on the floor, and finally sit back down to continue playing the machines. Story 46. Peristalsis on exposed intestines. When I was a student nurse on a placement with community nurses, I witnessed a very unique stoma and wound dressing procedure. This young woman, in her late 20s, had severe Crohn's disease to the point where she had developed multiple ulcers around her abdomen. These ulcers penetrated through to the surface, and you could see her intestines moving in a wave-like motion called peristalsis, which is how the digestive tract moves food through the body. At times, some gastric stomach content would squirt out. The dressing procedure was complex and sometimes painful, requiring 2 senior nurses to perform. When she cried out in pain, I felt my head hurt, my heart sank, and my knees threatened to buckle. Fortunately, I did not faint, which would have distracted the nurses from their task. It was one of the few moments in my life when I felt genuine secondhand pain. Thankfully, this patient now seems to have a reasonable quality of life. I saw her a couple of years later in the hospital when I became a graduate nurse. She still has a stoma, thankfully only one now, and surgical scarring over her abdomen. However, she is mobile and no longer confined to a wheelchair or bed at home. Story 47. It was the middle of the week, the middle of the day a few years ago. I was out picking up something for work and stopped at a gas station in a not-so-great neighborhood to grab an energy drink. On my way in, I walked by a set of shipping lockers where a woman in her 20s, probably 8 months pregnant, was huddled up to them, smoking something with a caustic smell from some rolled-up tin foil. I think about it every now and then. I hope the child is doing okay. Story 48. The first dead body I ever saw was a car crash victim lying dead in front of their car. They appeared very young, and it looked like they were thrown through their windshield. They had face planted onto the ground and landed in a way that made a very disturbing triangle shape with their body. Their arms were twisted and propped up behind their head and back in the most unnatural way. It was very similar to that one scene in the Suspiria remake. I think about them often when I buckle up. Story 49. I used to work across the road from a safe injection clinic. There are many things I wish I could delete from my mind. I have literally seen the worst of humanity in that place. If anyone is interested in some details, I will share some of the worst stories in the comments. Edit. A safe injection clinic is a place where drug users can go to use heroin and other substances without facing police intervention or accidental overdoses. Story 50. I worked in a home where they cared for several people with severe learning difficulties. One resident had an obsession with feces and would eat his own and smear it everywhere, which was unpleasant. One day, we found him in another resident's room, both of them eating the first resident's feces as if it were chocolate. Thinking about it still makes me feel very unwell. Story 51. At a party in the late 1980s, a girl takes a handful of Xanax. Less than 10 minutes later, she vomits. She then picks the partially digested pills from her vomit and takes them again. Story 52. Third-degree frostbite in the fingers and hands of the man our Arctic survival instructor said was the most likely to survive after he did a brief examination of our gear. The man had to keep his fingers separated because the blisters would merge, and his fingers would turn into flesh mittens if they were not kept apart during healing. Yes, good times. Absolute nightmare fuel. Turns out survival is unpredictable, and being overconfident and overexerting yourself is a terrible idea. Be cautious. Think first. Conserve energy. Story 53. My ex was incapable of not drinking too much alcohol. One night, he got a promotion at his job, and to celebrate, he got way too drunk with some of his coworkers. I had to go pick him up and take him home. He threw up in the carpet of my truck, even though he was holding his puke bucket and the window was down. When I finally got us home, he couldn't walk, so I had to carry him to the bathroom to take a shower because he was covered in puke. Once I got him in the bathroom, he puked on the floor, himself, and the shower. When I finally got him into the shower, he sat on the shower floor and proceeded to have explosive diarrhea, to which I exclaimed in horror, "You're defecating in the shower." He responded, "No, I'm not," as he scooped handfuls of his feces and pushed it down the drain. I don't know why I didn't leave him that night. Story 54. An older brother's friend got so drunk at a party that he passed out in his chair. He would occasionally wake up, vomit into his cup, then pass out again for a minute or two before waking up, taking a sip from the cup and vomiting again. He repeated this process at least 4 times. Story 55. The guys in my year liked to do foolish dares. They were usually the only ones getting hurt by these dares, so people watched and didn't stop them. One day, one of the guys came to school with a jar full of his pubic hair. He had a daring idea. He decided to challenge his best friend to eat a moldy sandwich that had been in the locker area for a few weeks. He filled it with his pubic hair and presented it to his friend. Word quickly spread, and soon we were all standing around watching with sick fascination as he psyched himself up to eat it. Soon enough, he was eating the sandwich as fast as he could before running to the bushes and vomiting it all up. Safe to say, I will never forget it. I heard from others in his class that he complained about all the pubic hair getting stuck in his braces and having to pull out long strands throughout the day. Story 56. I recently saw a homeless man pull his pants down and throw liquid waste in the face of a homeless woman, and she did not flinch. New Brunswick, New Jersey, is a wild place. Story 57. Rat dissection in my 9th grade biology class had many revolting moments that still make me gag. 3 moments in particular. Our teacher stuck a tiny straw in the rat's mouth and blew into its lung to show it inflating and deflating. Seeing a bare mouth so close to this gray, cold little rat lung turned my stomach. Next, I recall looking across the lab and seeing 2 boys unroll the longest intestine ever. Everyone was fascinated by the length, and I just wanted to be sick. I felt like someone could have jumped rope with it. Lastly, my lab partner and I got the pregnant rat, so our teacher spent a lot of time digging around our rat to show the class. Anytime I need to make myself throw up to feel better, my mind always goes to those rat memories. Disgusting. Story 58. The aftermath of an Amish buggy versus semi-truck accident, with occupants including an 11-year-old girl, is burned into my mind. Story 59. My friend in high school was dating a young man from another school. They met up on the weekend and invited me and his friend to join them. His friend showed up with a bag containing pieces of dried skin. He then sat down and ate them. Story 60. People keep their loved ones on life support while they are brain dead for their own selfish needs, causing the loved ones to suffer. It is even worse when family members are not physically present but continue to keep them alive, resulting in daily torture through constant poking and prodding. Story 61. Please do not think I am proud of what I am about to say. In Afghanistan, we engaged a small group of insurgents from across a small valley. It took an hour or 2 to reach the site, which was plenty of time for a few wild dogs to start consuming the bodies, including one poor man who miraculously was still alive. Story 62. In high school, there was a main road where most students who walked home took. I took this path as well. One day, I was on this road at a busy intersection, waiting for the crosswalk. As I was waiting, a van pulled up to make a right turn at the intersection. The driver, coming from the main road, was behaving inappropriately. It did not occur to me until years later that he was exposing himself to the students. Story 63. I worked in a bakery. After the day was finished, I would give the remaining food to a homeless man. This food would have been thrown away anyway. My boss saw me and demanded that I throw the food away first, and that he could dig through the trash if he wanted to eat. It broke my heart, as the homeless man was a young boy, and this was pure evil. Story 64. Back when I was an emergency medical technician, I treated a patient with a prolapsed rectum infested with maggots. The prolapse had been present for some time. Story 65. A group of men arrived at the emergency room with their skin melting off their burnt bodies after their methamphetamine laboratory exploded. The smell was unlike anything I have ever experienced. Burning human flesh combined with toxic chemicals created a revolting image and odor. I have not encountered anything worse than that in my career. Story 66. When I worked at Family Dollar, a lady came into my store wearing a dress. I assumed she was not wearing underwear because she defecated while walking down an aisle and left a trail behind her. Story 67. Riding a motorbike through rural Vietnam, I saw a food stand with a rotisserie setup cooking dogs' heads. I saw it for a moment and immediately recognized what it was. Dogs' heads. Story 68. My mom was and still is a heavy alcoholic. A few years ago, we were all sitting outside having a bonfire and eating dinner. Mom was intoxicated as usual, standing up and swaying. Suddenly, I smelled something unpleasant. To my surprise, the smell was coming from my mother, who had accidentally soiled herself but had no idea. My laughter turned to horror when our 12-year-old Chihuahua came over and started licking the diarrhea off the grass. I will never forget that scene. Story 69. Emergency department nurses have many stories. I am a hospitalist and was in the emergency department seeing a patient who sawed off his left arm because the voices inside his head said it was going to kill him. We transferred him to a university hospital for further treatment. Story 70. A wildlife photographer I follow on Instagram posted a video of an owl eating a vole one limb at a time, which was strange because owls usually swallow their prey whole and then spit up a pellet of bones. The vole was still alive and weakly thrashing around. Stuck with me for a while. Story 71. I watched a motorcycle driver wipe out on Interstate 84 at high speed. He and the bike were spread across 3 lanes. I pulled over to hear his friend say he was still alive, which was somehow worse than if he had been dead. Story 72. Years ago, before tamper-proof lids, my brother and I went into a local store to buy beer. My brother had a mouthful of Copenhagen chewing tobacco and needed to spit. So he grabbed a jar of jelly off the shelf, opened the jar, spat into it, and casually put it back. Story 73. My first assignment was special education pre-kindergarten. These children were 3 to 4 years old and had severe disabilities. A couple were in wheelchairs, mostly nonverbal, with varying disabilities. One little girl was very affectionate. She would squeeze you tightly and nuzzle right into you. One day, she was taking too long in the bathroom, so I went to check on her with one of the aides. She got up, wiped herself, blew her nose into the same piece of toilet paper, flushed it, and finished her business. After that, I tried teaching high school. Story 74. I saw 6 police officers beating a 12-year-old black child because a white woman accused him of stealing from a CVS store. Story 75. Parking my van in the dirty loading bay in my city, there were always drug users around. I thought 2 men were urinating against the wall, but they were injecting heroin into their genital veins. I guess all their other veins had collapsed. Also in the same loading bay, there was a person passed out with no jeans on because they had a serious bowel movement. It looked like someone had hammered 2 sweet potatoes together. Story 76. I was somewhere in the Middle East and I saw 4 or 5-year-old children chasing a 3-year-old of another ethnicity with sticks and stones. They were not playing. The girl was crying and genuinely scared. They were copying what their parents taught them. Almost 2 decades later, those children are now adults, and whatever I see coming from that part of the world does not surprise me at all. Story 77. A few years ago, I witnessed my neighbor climb to the top of the stairs to enter his apartment. Within a second of turning around, he slipped and fell an entire flight, hitting his head on the concrete. He died instantly. Blood splattered all over the pavement. It is very sad to have flashbacks about. Story 78. As a child, I often spent time at my grandparents' house with my cousins. Many stray cats wandered around there. They were not really pets, but my grandmother would leave a large bowl of food out for them, so they came frequently, and we would try to play with them. It was enjoyable, but since they were still strays running off anywhere, life could be difficult, and sometimes we found one whose life had been cut short, including kittens. Usually, we kids took it upon ourselves to bury them. At one point, my grandfather was working in his yard and created a large pile of dirt. I don't remember the exact reason. That pile either contained or was near one such kitten we had buried. One of my cousins found it and showed me. My memory may be a bit exaggerated, but as I recall, the kitten was so covered in maggots that parts of it almost appeared to move collectively, as if reanimated. Story 79. Honestly, probably the time I saw someone clip their toenails on a bus and just leave them on the floor. I still think about it sometimes and feel gross. Story 80. Our new puppy had tapeworms and diarrhea, with tapeworms in it, all over our apartment. I had to pick up individual worms over 6 inches long. Story 81. I was at Disneyland in Anaheim, and there was a mother asking her 12-year-old daughter to change her 1-year-old's diaper. The 12-year-old said no. The mother changed the diaper of the 1-year-old and then threw the open diaper at the 12-year-old's face, getting runny stool all over her face. It was not just the stool, but the entire family dynamic of expecting a 12-year-old to take care of a 1-year-old. Story 82. A Reddit page called Giro is probably the most bizarre and revolting thing I have ever witnessed. Do not visit the page. Story 83. How my fellow American soldiers acted toward Haitians while we were in Haiti in 1994. That is where I decided to leave the service and eventually the country. Story 84. The time I walked in on my parents having sex in the shower. I was so disgusted that for the next several years, I wasted every birthday wish, every 4-leaf clover, every heads-up penny, and every shooting star wishing I could unsee what I saw that day. Story 85. I briefly worked as a janitor at a grocery store. One day, the boys' bathroom had a problem with the piping. The main toilet would act like it was clogged and overflow when flushed, and the urinal would leak water. The main toilet was filled and would overflow with dirty water if flushed. I told the other janitor not to flush it and to wait for a plumber, but he kept trying. Eventually, the whole bathroom flooded with dirty water. Story 86. It was a really hot day in the middle of a heat wave in England. There was a tiny roundabout at the bottom of the hill where I used to live in Egham. A tanker carrying meat slurry bound for pet food toppled over, turning too sharply at the roundabout. It spilled the slurry all over the road and down the hot concrete. It took a long time to clean up. It has been over 25 years, but I can still smell it. Story 87. Animals in China are skinned alive for the fur industry. China produces a large portion of the world's fur. Dogs and cats in China are subjected to brutal treatment, including being burned or slow-boiled alive for consumption. It is believed that the more tortured and frightened the animal is, the better it tastes. Before this, the animals are transported and kept overcrowded in wire cages for hours, then forcibly removed and sometimes beaten. Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Cambodia also participate in the dog and cat meat trade, with Korea and Vietnam being particularly severe after China. Story 88. I witnessed a goat urinating into its own mouth. If that was not bad enough, another one came over and took a sip as well. Goats are filthy, disgusting animals. Story 89. My ex-fiancé threw up all over our bathroom and the bathroom sink outside of the bathroom when he was incredibly drunk. I ended up cleaning it up. Story 90. I had a murder case once where the victim was shot in the back of the head and left in the woods in the open. It took 6 weeks before my client led the police to the body. My job was to review all the autopsy photos. Story 91. The worst experience was stopping on the motorway and seeing a burning car with people still inside, not alive. I was about 5 or 6 years old. It was one of the defining moments of my life, and I have never told my mother about it, as I was fascinated rather than horrified. Story 92. My roommate and I were at a neighbor's house for Thanksgiving dinner. The first thing I noticed was her chihuahua defecating on the floor next to the table. As if that wasn't enough to ruin my appetite, my neighbor casually announced that she and her family had just recovered from the stomach flu. Right after saying that, she licked her fingers and continued touching the turkey with her bare hands. I pretended to be sick and left with my roommate. Another time, my brother vomited unexpectedly while under the influence of cannabis. Once, I walked into a stall at work and saw a large stool on the floor. Story 93. This is relatively mild in comparison, but it was quite unpleasant to witness from 5 feet away. I was a teenager and got on the city bus after school, sat down, and looked out the window. A man wearing a crop top, cut-off jean shorts, and sandals lit a cigarette beside a bus shelter, then squatted and started vomiting. He wiped his mouth briefly, vomited some more, and I noticed diarrhea oozing from his shorts, falling to the ground and splattering his feet. It was a hot summer day, and the window was open, so the smell made me gag. Story 94. I used to be in and out of the children's hospital quite a bit. One time, I was in the kids' hangout area and saw one of the other sick kids, maybe about 7 or 8, sitting there removing and reinserting his own nasal tube. He would take it out and then thread it the whole way back in. He was obviously a pro. That image has never left my head. They couldn't get that thing in me without me vomiting at least twice while crying, and here he was doing it for fun. Story 95. A young man who lives around the corner from me, a muscular individual with distinctive tattoos, had a promotional video for his subscription content circulating around town. He was flexing his muscles on top of a person wearing a balaclava, squatting down and releasing loud, obnoxious protein-fueled flatulence directly into the masked man's face. By the way, the muscular man is not wearing a balaclava. He is unashamedly unmasked, similar to a supporter of a controversial political figure. The person in the balaclava is smoking like a schoolchild using a grape-flavored vape during a bathroom break. Story 96. Dog with aspergillosis had mucus pouring from holes made in her skull. She was eating her own diarrhea, vomiting it up, eating it again, vomiting it up again, and needing to be wrestled away to prevent re-eating. Mucus from the relief holes was flying everywhere. Then it was cleaned up with an incontinence pad. It was basically like a giant mucus and diarrhea pancake. Story 97. Saw a homeless man remove his urine bag and pour it into a drain in the city center, getting it on his hands and clothes. Then he lit a cigarette and sat down. Story 98. More sad but still revolting. I was in McDonald's in Asia very late at night. At the table next to us was an 8 to 10-year-old boy being tutored in mathematics by his father. The boy was exhausted, and the father was shouting at him for making mistakes. The boy had a breakdown, stood up, walked into the middle of the tables in front of everyone, pulled down his clothes, and engaged in inappropriate behavior. Once he finished, he went back to his father and continued his mathematics. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.